5 programs, one for each day of the week, and go around his music a bit, introduce people to it, and it was quite a good reaction. And then I went on to do 5 days, 5 of my favourite great cellist recordings from the past, but focusing on concertos, cello concertos that are very rarely heard in the concert hall. And I think that's interesting. I don't know if I'm going to be doing anything else on those lines at the moment, because, believe it or not, work at the Conservatoire is perhaps almost busier than ever, because we're having endless meetings all the time when the technology works, which it is doing now. But at the beginning it didn't. But of course we've got so much planning to do, and there was all the beginning, what are we going to do about student graduations and all that kind of thing. So a huge number of meetings about that. These are not decisions that you can take lightly. You have to take a huge amount of things into account. And now, of course, we're beginning to plan for various scenarios of timing, of if lockdown ends, then, or when we're allowed back in the building, how many people will be allowed at once? Will we be doing one-to-ones? Will we, there's just limitless things, and we need to be ready. We need to be ready for different kinds of scenarios.
Very much so, and I can't begin to imagine how much you have to go through. One of my friends is a secondary school teacher, and they were saying that they're almost having to play God at the moment and decide on their students' GCSE results because they can't come in and take exams. So I think there's a huge, overwhelming amount of work for conservatoires as well, with not only just the elements of people being in the building and concerts going forward, but also the assessments and all the education side to it as well, which must be quite the task. Which leads me on quite nicely to one of the topics I would love to chat to you about, which is how this is affecting music students and what the future might look for them. Because obviously this is going to be defining for the careers for musicians for the next 10, 15 years potentially, as to how we work and what skills we potentially need. So how do you think it's affected your students so far?
Well, of course, it affects everybody differently. And, I'm personally feeling incredibly sorry for everyone really being isolated in this way, and for musicians it can be a very difficult experience, and I know that some people are finding it extremely hard. What we have tried to do is to graduate people. I think that's the most important thing in the last year. So of course there have been a lot of questions about giving final recitals, and so what we're trying to do is do these recitals online, and we're completely stressing that the quality of them is absolutely not the issue. But not only that, we are going to have 2 assessments, one from the head of department and one from their main teacher. And if they have 2 teachers, we will have 2 reports. So that will be another way of making the assessment. But really, I think the difficulty for some students has been that this is some point that they look forward to as soon as they walk in the door. They're thinking of, when we graduate, we will have that solo recital to give in front of our friends, in front of our family. And of course, it was extremely difficult for us to take the decision to do it as we are. But the reason for it is that we want the students to graduate. We want them to be able to move on with their lives as soon as this lockdown is over, as soon as it's over. The other thing that we have offered, and we will absolutely stick to, is that any student who wants to come back and give a public recital after they've graduated, they will be able to do that. So they will be able to do these recitals, and they will be able to invite friends and family, as well as hopefully having graduated. And other conservatoires are doing the same as we are. Others have offered, I think, the possibility of deferring these recitals till September. But our problem with that is that nobody knows if that'll be able to happen. So if the students have the recital deferred till September, and then they're all excited about working towards that, and then it still doesn't happen, that seems to me a really unfortunate situation. So we never are going to be able to please everybody. It's just totally impossible. And some of the students have said, why didn't we ask the students? Well, what does that actually mean? Because, we have, including acting, we have 1,000 students. Well, obviously, only perhaps just over 100 will be doing maybe say maximum 150 students doing a final recital. Well, we might be getting 150 different answers. And finally, we have to take a decision, and it's not easy. And I've had some emails from students, not that many, but a few, which really make me feel very sad. And it's not their fault, it's not our fault, and we honestly are trying to do the best thing that we can. But I do hope down the line that if we go through this process, we get the graduation done, and then we offer the live recital later on, that they will see that they might be in a much stronger position than some of their friends in other conservatoires.
Certainly. I think one thing that's really nice that you're trying to do is to invite people back to do performances. So I think although at the time it didn't feel like it's at the moment, because I was too busy focusing on practice, etc. But the final recital is a very nice ending point and chance to show your art and your music to friends, family, and various people. And those things, actually looking back for me, are very important. At the time, you were very narrow-minded, I was very narrow-minded in my focus of practicing frantically to perform. But it is something that should be marked at some point. And as you say, given the option that at some point they can come back and perform a final recital, as September is potentially looking ambitious, to say the least, is I think really admirable.
I think that the problem is that we just don't know. So we're trying to bring some certainty in a way into the situation. And I want people not to feel that this period has been sort of a void and it's been wasted. I want people to continue to be working to just try to move through it. I mean, we will come out of it. We know how difficult it is, actually, really, for everybody, but it will end. And we want our students to be in the best position when it does, to move on with their careers, move on with their lives, give the live recitals if they want to do that. And there's a sort of practical issue there too. I know a lot of students like to have the live recital recorded, and they can use this as a promotional tool, and we will make sure also that they are offered a professional quality recording to keep and have and use afterwards. So they won't lose any of that.
Very much so. So this leads me on nicely to what happens when students graduate in the future, as obviously concert going may be very different from September onwards. I was reading a blog earlier about what social distancing during concerts may look like and having to have 4 or 5 seats in between audience members, which is obviously going to vastly change what happens. What do you think the issues we face going forward as a sector, and how do you think students can be resourced, or what skills do they need in this new world we go into?
Well, that's an enormous question.
It's a multi-million-pound question as well, I think. If you have a very good answer, you'll be very rich.
We'll really give a definitive answer. We just don't know how quickly we would be able to get back into the situation of normal concert giving. I'm pretty sure that concert giving will, come probably earlier than people think it might. But as you say, there'll be the social distancing. So it could be well over a year that it gets back to anything like normal. Of course, if there's a miracle vaccine is found, everything could change very quickly. But so we just don't know, and it will be a difficult time. It's a very uncertain time. And as I say, I feel incredibly huge sympathy with self-employed musicians at the moment, which a huge number of us are. I think skills for this period, I think resilience is going to be absolutely crucial, and also trying to, as you have always done, to find ways to work around the situation. I know it's so easy to say, it's so difficult to do it, but a lot of musicians are being extremely creative online. I mean, the amount of online one-to-one teaching, all the teaching we're doing now, I mean, it's opening up new worlds, really, about long-distance learning. So there are definitely things and skills that we can develop out of all this. which will always be useful in the future. So the more that I suppose people can think like that, the better. The more perhaps they can start recording themselves and building up perhaps some kind of library of recordings, those kind of things that you can do. But, there's no denying it's a very tough time. I mean, I did say at the beginning, I wrote a sort of blog piece on the Facebook page about my feelings just when the lockdown started. And of course, musicians are very resilient people because they spend a lot of time practicing alone. So being alone is not a new thing for musicians because a lot of the time that's how they have to do their work. So there's some inbuilt experience of working alone already there. But let's hope it doesn't last much longer.
No, very true. And I think you've touched on something really key that tends to be left out of the conversation, which is the resilience side. And that a lot of what people have been trying to provide are skills and knowledge and the tech side of which buttons to press or which microphone to buy. But in reality, this is a long haul for us musicians. And actually, the resilience and the mental health side is a huge, huge factor for people going forwards, which especially for, I think, not just people who are graduating, but those who have just recently graduated because they don't come into the government's, in the UK, 12-month minimum self-employed support scheme, which is slightly sad for obviously for them.
Just going back to what
yes.
we were saying, I mean, I think if there's any particular projects and in particular things, skills about technology and things that you've always meant to do, this is absolutely the time to do it. To experiment with the technology, even with friends and everything. I mean, it's a great time to be able to learn all these extra skills, at least they're extra mostly to me. And as far as music goes, of course, it is a time to learn that piece you'd always wanted or promised yourself to learn and probably might never have done if it wasn't for this time where you actually can. So, I mean, there are things, there are positives, and we have to try to make the most of those.
Certainly. One thing I've mentioned a few times on the podcast before is that there's never been a time where the audience has been more forgiving and appreciative and thankful and supportive. Yeah. I think everyone who watches or listens or engages with musicians is wanting to be there to help everyone through this time. So I think in terms of experimenting, there's a very kind audience.
Sure, people missing concerts and theatre and everything hugely. So there'll be a huge demand for it when we come back.
Very much so. So going back to projects online, we mentioned at the beginning that you started a project to revisit your father's music. I'm really fascinated to know what sort of reception did you have from people online in regards to reconnecting and sharing his music?
I think obviously some people tuned in because they knew it already, but there were a few that didn't, and the reaction was positive. I mean, he's a very romantic composer, writing completely out of step with his times. I mean, his main body of work would have been done in probably the 30s, 40s, early 50s. And then when he got to the early 50s and all the styles of contemporary music were changing, he just felt completely out of step with the time and pretty much stopped composing altogether. And it was only after he died that I was able to find out how much he wrote. Because it wasn't that his music was neglected, it's that he actually hid it away and pretty much refused to allow it to be discovered. So it's a strange story, but I think his music meant a huge amount to him. And he knew that it wasn't, by and large, going to get the reception that at that particular time that he would have wanted. And he didn't, nobody wants their work rubbish, do they? And I think he knew that's what would happen. So he basically really stopped it from being performed. So it's a very strange experience for me, probably quite a long time ago now, 25 years ago, when I started really looking into what he'd written.
Very much so. It must be very surreal finding all this body of music and a side to your father that you may have not seen before, apart from obviously some of his other works.
Had I known really his ability, I was starting, late 70s, early 80s, playing a huge amount and really starting to play all over the world. And I commissioned, at one point, a cello concerto from Rodrigo. Well, when I started to look back on the things my father had written, I really would have tried to persuade him to write something for cello and orchestra or cello and strings or something like that. But I didn't do that because I just didn't know really what he was capable of writing.
Very much so. Are there any particular gems that you found from his catalogue that are really special, or you think are really fantastic pieces of music?
I think, by and large, he was a miniaturist. So probably his biggest, most substantial, and maybe greatest piece is his tone poem Aurora, which is for full orchestra. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece, but he wrote very little for orchestra. So people, they're, I think, quite reluctant to program a piece of music by a composer who they just basically don't know. It's like, I'm really fond of the cello concerto by Miaskovsky. I think it's his greatest work, but it's hardly ever heard in the concert hall, perhaps because if the greatest work is a composer's cello concerto, and they're not a composer that's known, it's just not going to get programmed, which is sad because the public do get, I believe, an ever narrowing repertoire offered to them in the concert hall. The diet is getting increasingly restricted, and I think it's sad because there's so much interesting, great music out there that people just never really get a chance to hear unless they are record collectors,
Yeah, very much so. Which brings me quite nicely on to one thing I wanted to ask about, and that I knew that at the end of term you had some very big plans for performances at Conservatoire with commissioning new works and various things. You may or may not be able to say, because I haven't actually checked in on what the news is with this, but how has this crisis affect those plans, and are you able to reschedule?
We had an absolutely brilliant end of June orchestral concert planned, which is in my view so brilliant. I don't want to tell you everything that's in it because the plan is to reprogram it as soon as we can, and so we're sort of looking and talking to the artists who were involved at the end of December, beginning of January. That might be optimistic, but we're trying, and we're finding out the availability. But one piece that was going to happen was a new piano concerto by our visiting teacher of composition, Erilyn Whalen, for Rebecca Omodia, who is an alumna of the Conservatoire, and she's written it, and Rebecca's had it, and thinks it's a really terrific piece. So we can't. That is one thing I can tell you about. But it was a concert. It is a concert to celebrate diversity in music, and I think we're really looking forward to reprogramming that.
Certainly, I think it's
a lot of other plans. I know that Paul Wingfield, the opera department, had huge plans. There were massive acting plans and performances that have had to be cancelled and were cancelled at the very last minute, which was extremely painful for the students and everyone involved. None of us wanted this situation, and that's how it is.
Very much so. I was speaking to Amanda McLeod in one of these podcasts about what the repertoire for performances will be like in future when it comes to programming and various things. And one of my fears is that in general, programming will become narrower and narrower as to sort of try and get bums on seats repertoire and try and get audiences back in. But I think in reality that audiences will be wanting new works and different things.
They think positively. Because of social distancing, they can't have such big audiences, so maybe we can experiment.
Very true. That could be a fantastic way of looking at it, I think. And I think as well, we tend to assume audiences aren't wanting to engage with new works or discover new things. And in reality, most of my experience is the opposite, that people really want to try and discover these new things and various connections. So my hope is that we're going to go for new works a lot more.
I think so. I mean, you look at the success of the proms, it's a huge mix of different music, so it can be done. And actually, I think in Birmingham, Merga's been doing some extraordinary things with the programming and a lot of music that people didn't know, particularly concentrating on Weinberg, I think you say, the Russian composer who was a great friend of Shostakovich, and she's been bringing out a lot of his music, and it's fascinating stuff.
Very much so. So looking ahead, do you have any plans for more online content, both at Conservatoire or yourself, or is it something that's developing on a day-to-day basis? Because I know that you have potentially one or two things to do in the day with running a music college as well, so it may maybe take up most of your time, I imagine.
I'm convinced that out of all the online learning, all the online experimentation that's going on, the concerts that are going on, that things will definitely come out of this. I think, and I thought right at the beginning that this experience for humanity will result in some maybe not that many, but some fundamental long-term changes in the way people think. The amount of travel that people were doing by plane, and I think people will stop to think, is this really necessary? If you live in the UK, maybe you could go on holiday in Shropshire. It's very beautiful. But I think that people will think twice, or maybe even more than that. And some of the things that will come out of this won't all be negative. And it's wonderful to see the clear air. And I saw a photo yesterday of Portsmouth, the harbour of Portsmouth, which looked absolutely clear, like it was like Pacific Ocean, green, blue. I mean, instead of the usual muddy, oil-filled grey. So hopefully people will take some positives out of this and look to the future and not basically pollute and destroy our planet as we have been doing.
I couldn't agree more. And I've seen so many little bits that are similar, such as mountain goats going through towns in Wales and sort of taking over in various parts. And again, air quality. I live in the middle of nowhere in Yorkshire, so it tends not to be a problem for me. But I know that friends in London are enjoying the fact that the air quality is so much nicer, which is a huge benefit. So I tend to try and want to end these on a nice positive note. Certainly. What have you seen over the last, it's almost 2 months now, that's really made you smile or touched you in the world of classical music?
I'd like to move. I mean, obviously there have been great concerts and great, innovations and things people are doing, putting together virtual orchestras. I'm going to do something with the strings. We're doing a version of Nimrod with all the strings, and I'm going to virtually conduct it. How it's all going to work, I don't know. I mean, these things are happening all the time. But some of the things that have made me laugh are the obvious things that will make you laugh, like some cartoons and things, and you just think people's wacky, zany sense of humour. Those are the things that keep people alive through an awful time like this. But if anybody has lost a loved one near to them, there's really nothing that's going to make them smile at the moment. And these things will take a huge amount of time. But I think some positives will come. Environmentally, certainly. And, with our attitude with the students has really been to try to help them through it by motivating them, keeping things to the timetable as much as we can, and then giving them the opportunities they very sadly missed out on right now, giving it back to them later. So that's really the way that we've been thinking about this.
Very much so. And I know as a student, when I didn't have structure and things, that was when I always struggled. So I think it's fantastic you're helping them do that during this time.
I think musicians need structure, particularly when you're working alone. I think it's really good to have a timetable. When you're out in the profession, still a lot of the time you'll be practicing, working. To have a timetable when you get up, when you put hours aside to practice, when you put hours aside to take a break, it's a really important thing to have that structure. And some people might come out of this with a much more clearly defined sense of a structure that suits them. So, let's keep trying to look at the positives, even though they may be quite hard to see sometimes.
Certainly. I think it's a wonderful point to end on as well. So if anyone's looking to engage with either yourself or with the Royal Birmingham Conservatoire online, where can they find you?
Oh, well, there's all kinds of ways that they can contact us. I mean, I guess the time-honoured way is email, which is still very much in operation. There's a Twitter account, there's a Facebook account. I mean, there are all many kinds of ways to contact, and of course, there's the Conservatoire website.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It really is so great to have you here. As always, you can listen back to any of the podcasts on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts. All the information's on the website, which is david-taylor.org. And yeah, I really hope you're keeping well. So on Monday, I'll also be talking to Alistair Tate, who is the Chief Executive of YCAT, about how it's affecting the artist management industry, as well as young artists who are in the first steps of their professional career as well. You get to laugh at me now, Julian, as I still haven't quite worked out how to end any of these yet. So they just tend to ramble out as a sort of, fizzle and hope for the best. But if you've been watching, thank you very much, and I hope to see you again next time. Thank you very much.
Yeah, great to talk, David.
Likewise. Thank you.